Recording. Okay, marvellous. Over to you, Emily. Thank you so much.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So how do I get it so that I can see everyone? There we go. If you're willing to share your video, that would be wonderful, because I'm going to ask you some questions in a moment, and it'd be lovely to get a feel for who's here and what we're bringing with us and what your kind of intentions are and for the session. So yeah, you won't be seen on the broadcast as far as I understand, but it would just be so that we can interact with each other a little bit more. There'll be opportunities to ask questions at various points, and there'll also be some discussion that we'll do at the end of the session. So I'd like to just start by, well, I can introduce myself. I'm Dr. Emily Grossman. I've been an avid attendee and participant at Butterfields for the last 6 years or so. Probably one of my favourite festivals, possibly recognise some of you lovely people. And I applied to offer a talk and workshop on this theme for Butterfields this year, which was the first time I would be potentially coming as a facilitator. And obviously lockdown happened, so here we are. So I'm really excited to be here at one of my, absolutely probably my favourite kind of conscious, connected, spiritual festival, where there's so much to learn and so much to feel into, but also to educate ourselves, and to be offering something that's so close to my own heart is really important to me. You may have seen me at the festival before. You might have seen my partner Kimway, who's also on the call, who I'll introduce in a moment. He's been performing as Kimway is non-binary trans, his pronouns are he, him, and he's been performing as a singer-songwriter at Butterfields for the last, how long, Kimway? Do you want to just say hello? Can't remember.
Hello. You might have seen me on stage with a guitar or a flute, or by myself or with a group of people, or a drum. Just getting involved in as much music as possible at Butterfields. Hello.
I introduced Kimway because he's also going to help facilitate a little of the questions if necessary. And also just to say that, yeah, we're both hugely keen on Butterfields Festival, and we were both going individually, not knowing each other before we became partners a couple of years ago. So I'd like to just start by asking to just get a feel for kind of who we've got here and what you're bringing in terms of your awareness and your feeling about the planetary crisis, you know, what's going on our planet. So in terms of how much you feel you know, so I'm going to be doing this with a sort of wavy hands. And in Extinction Rebellion, which is part of the work that I now do as a climate activist, when we do Zoom calls, we have a sort of wavy up for, yes, I'm really on board with this, and a sort of middle ground for not really sure, and kind of low. You may have come across this a lot before during Zoom calls in lockdown. If you haven't got your video on, or if you can't for any reason, no problem. Feel free to post in the chat box anytime I ask a question, or anytime you want to interact with something. If you want to post questions generally in the chat box, you can, but I would, if you are able to wait until the time when I open for questions, that would be a little bit easier. But if you want to get it down there just to collect your thoughts, then that's fine too. So yeah, for those of you who I can see, and for those of you who I can't, like I said, maybe post your response in the chat box. With a sort of indication of wavy hands, I just want to get a sense of how much people feel they already know about the planetary crisis, about the climate and ecological emergency, what's going on our planet right now. So, you know, if you're kind of really up with it, perhaps maybe you've done activism, or maybe you've intellectually just really got your head around it, and you know exactly what's going on, and you're here to learn a bit more or connect with like-minded people. Let's kind of have a wave up like here. And then down here is basically knowing very little at all, and anything in between. So, and I expect there'll be a mixture of types. So we've got a few middle grounds. We've got some right up there. Great, lovely to see you. And we've got some in the middle. Those are who I can see. And if anyone else wants to post in the chat box and let me know where you're at with that, that would be great too. Okay, so we haven't got anyone that I could see who sort of feels like they know nothing at all, which is great. And if you do, that's, or equally if you're in that category, you're very welcome. I will be talking basically sort of from bottom up, but hopefully there will also be information and useful things that you can learn, even if you are sort of very involved already in what's going on the planet. I come to you as a scientist, as a science communicator, and as an activist. So my story is that Oh, sorry, one other question actually before we start is that in terms of what you do know, in terms of how somewhere in between, lovely, in terms of how alarmed or agitated, upset, scared, frightened, angry, whatever the emotion is, in terms of the intensity of what your feelings are about what's going on the planet, can I also have a sort of show of hands of kind of where you are with your levels of alarm, agitation, fear, anger, frustration, whatever it might be? So, okay, we've got quite a lot of hands up there, somewhere in between again. Great, lovely. And so you're all welcome, no matter what stage you're at. And third question is that those of you who do feel alarmed or who do feel really engaged with, well, yes, I know what's going on, and I do feel alarmed or I do feel kind of up with it. How do you feel in terms of being able to talk to people in your life and convince them that actually this is cause for alarm and we really do need to be doing things? Because for me, that's the common thread of people who already do get it and feel scared. You know, how many of you up here feel, yep, I'm really confident that I can use all the right facts and figures or arguments to convince the skeptics and convince your parents, your kids, your partner to actually get on board as well. So if you feel like you're equipped with all that information, or if you feel like actually you don't really know how to talk to people to convince them, again, let's have a bit of a show of hands. Yeah, so as to be expected, that's a much lower temperature, shall we say, excuse the pun, in terms of, we call it a temperature check in Extinction Rebellion. That's like, ooh, high temperature. But yeah, we've got a much lower temperature in terms of people being able to feel that they've got the knowledge, the information, or just the communication skills, perhaps, to be able to convince others. And I think one of the things that I would like for us to get from this session is firstly to raise awareness for those who may not know all the information they want to know, to talk about possible solutions that we can take individually and as a collective, what those options are, to talk very frankly about where we actually are in terms of our planetary crisis, but also to equip you and to arm you with some arguments, some facts and figures and information, very minimal, I'm not going to be too fact heavy, to help you to fuel your arguments, to be able to communicate with others and to be able to help to convince them, because part of the best thing we can do is not just take action, but is to educate others. And so that's what I'd like to be able to support you and help you with as well going forward. So given that we're talking about something that for some people is really quite challenging to absorb and to take on, you might already be holding a lot of fear, a lot of emotion around that. I want to just kind of let you know that yes, there will be an opportunity to ask questions, and there will be a short time right at the end where we'll kind of do a little bit of a process just to kind of absorb and get present and to feel what learning a bit more about this, discussing this, has brought up for us. So there will be a chance to do that. I'm not just going to sort of leave you high and dry with kind of, here's all the terrible stuff that's going on, off you go kind of thing. So there will be space for that. So I come to you, like I say, as an ex-research scientist. So I have a PhD in cancer research. I now work as a science communicator. So my role in the world is to help people to understand science and make sense of science and to communicate it in a way that's easy for non-scientists to understand and that's engaging. So I've been doing that in a variety of different fields over the last kind of 7 or 8 years, communicating science in lots of different ways, doing lots of talks in schools, trying to engage kids in science, doing lots of talks about women in science, raising awareness about diversity. And that's kind of where I was until just over a year ago. And just over a year ago, I was invited by my lovely partner, Kim Way, who I've already introduced, to go along to one of the Extinction Rebellion protests. Now, this isn't a political talk. I'm not, you know, it's not, I don't care how you choose to engage with the crisis. It's more that I just want you to have some options and understanding. But my routine has been through Extinction Rebellion, which is why I talk about it. So I went along to the protests. Could the climate crisis kill 6 billion people? The key point, I'm not going to answer questions as we go along, but I just do want to address that head on because I think it's a really important point. And then I'll try and come to questions all in one go. But the key word in that sentence, the key word is could. And the answer is yes. Will it? We don't know. And that is the key issue that I see around climate science communication, because we do not know for sure what's going to happen. Nobody knows. Could it? Absolutely. There have been top climate scientists from across the globe who've said that where we're heading right now, they can't see how our planet could accommodate more than about 4 to 6 billion people. Now, all things being the same, we're heading towards a population of about 10 or 11 billion by the end of the century. So could it? Absolutely. Will it? We just don't know, but we're looking at risks and likelihoods. It could just be that the birth rate goes down because we simply can't sustain as many people on the planet. But there are already millions across the globe who are impacted, suffering, and dying as a result of climate change. And it's only going to get worse unless we take radical action. So I'm going to leave that there for a moment. I'm going to park that, but I wanted to address that because it is important. So yeah, just a little bit of how I got into this. So I went along to the protest last spring, simply because Kinway said, look, I'm playing in the Samba band and will you come along? And no, he didn't actually. He would never have said that to me. He said, I'm playing in the Samba band. And I said, can I come along and support you? And he was like, okay, if you want. So I went along to the protest. I'm just going to share my screen for a second because I want to show you. I'm not very good at this technical stuff, believe it or not, even though I'm a scientist. So bear with me while I see if I can share my screen with you. Desktop, PowerPoint, here we go. So, oopsie. So that's kind of what I went along to experience in the rebellion. So that's Kinway leading the Samba band and making a bit of a ruckus at various points around London. And I went along and was seeing all these banners everywhere saying, you know, mass extinction and 6 billion people might die and 12 years to save the world. And I just thought, oh my God, this is seriously, that can't be true. Like, I feel very uncomfortable about this. And you know what? As much as I love you, if I'm going to get engaged with this, Kinway, I really need to check out if this is for real. Because quite frankly, it sounds like alarmism, it sounds like scare tactics, and it sounds complete nonsense. And I thought that for 3 reasons. Number one was that I was like, I know a little bit about climate science from I did a degree in natural sciences at Cambridge University, and I did some molecular biology, and I learned a little bit about climate science. I was like, look, I know enough about it to think, well, I've not really heard that much about it. So firstly, if it was really that bad, surely someone like me who's devoted their life to science, to engaging the public with science, to talking about science, by this point, surely somebody would have invited me to give a talk on it, or to research it, or to find out about it, or to explain it to them. And, you know, slightly arrogantly, I was like, well, you know, this is my job. I'm a science communicator. And if I don't think it's that bad and I've not heard much about it, it can't be true. Little did I know. Second point was, okay, well, if it was really that bad, you know, surely it would be on the front page of every newspaper. It would be head of BBC News reports. It would be featured in all our media. So it can't be that true. Because I, at that point, was still naively thinking that actually the media told us the truth about everything that's going on in the world. So I was like, okay, well, and I worked in the media. I've done a lot of work myself in the media, and I trust them. And I was like, right, okay, well, it can't be that true, because otherwise we'd have been told. And thirdly, I thought, well, can't be true, because if it were true, and if it really were that bad, then all the politicians, the grown-ups in charge, would be doing something about it. Because again, naively, at, you know, a relatively old age, I'm not as old as, I'm much older than I look, was still naively under the impression that the people in charge were actually knew what they were talking about. And I thought, you know, if it were true, then they'd be doing something about it. So I thought, well, you know, I'm not just going to dismiss this, I'll at least look into it. So given my dedication to finding out the truth, my whole life has been about wanting to know the truth, wanting to understand the truth, wanting to understand information, and wanting to communicate that to others. I'm autistic, and part of my kind of superpower / challenge is that I won't accept anything anyone tells me unless I can get to the absolute truth of it myself and verify that it's for real. Hence why I also accepted that the politicians were telling us the truth, and so were the media. I just had no idea that this could be not true. So I thought, okay, well, let me at least research it myself and see what I can find out. So that was sort of the beginning of one of probably the most challenging years of my life. in terms of a coming of age, a loss of innocence around the media and the politicians, but also a growing awareness, a dawning of the reality of what's really going on our planet. And, you know, I'm trained as a scientist. I've spent many, many years learning how to analyze data, how to go to primary sources, how to work out what to believe and what not to believe, how to work out which studies are trustworthy, which experts are trustworthy. You know, there's a lot of experts out there. There's a lot of pseudoscience, fake science, misinformation, disinformation out there. And I know how to distinguish between those. And I'm very, very cautious, careful, and thorough with the way that I research. And I can honestly say that I've done very little since in the past year. It's become my special interest, so we say. And I've barely had a good night's sleep since. It's been a very challenging and frightening year of uncovering the truth. And since beginning to uncover it, I've decided to devote my life, my career, pretty much all I do, to communicating about the climate and ecological crisis. Because what I discovered was that if someone like me didn't even know what was going on, then how is everyone else supposed to know? So that was kind of my way in. And as part of that process, I decided to write kids' books about the climate crisis. I decided to write documents for Extinction Rebellion to help them explain the climate crisis, to do media interviews, and to write talks. So that is where I come to you today with a presentation that I'd like to offer just for the next sort of 20 minutes or so before we move into discussion about my understanding, or it's not my understanding, it's the truth, but where I've got to in my understanding of the truth about what's really going on our planet. More importantly, why it's happening, how we know it's definitely our fault, and where we're going to be heading, and why we need to take radical action, both individually, but more importantly, collectively. I will stop for questions at some point, but if you do have questions, like I said, put them in the chat box. And I would like to also just address the fact, first of all, that what I'm going to be sharing, and probably what some of you already know, is deeply traumatic. You know, what's really going on in the world, it brings up a lot of different types of feelings and emotions for people. And maybe it doesn't for you, that's okay too. But if you're someone, which is natural, where it would do, I just want to just kind of get present with that. So I'm sure some of you might be aware of the stress response. So I've also studied quite a lot about trauma because myself, I've experienced trauma, and also it's something I'm very interested in. I'm interested in psychology and how people work and how people think. And as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, the fight or flight response is there, the stress response, shall we call it, triggers the fight or flight, the F responses. And that's to help us deal with scary and ultimately potentially life-threatening situations. So what's going on our planet is scary, and could be for you, for your family, or for people around the planet who you may empathically care about, life-threatening situation. So it is inevitable that for some of us, it will spark challenging feelings. Now, the stress response is how we deal with any kind of scary or overwhelming situation. And it's very useful to us. It helps us to kind of deal with it. And you're probably aware that in response to something scary, we could have a fight response. And a fight response in this particular scenario would be anger, frustration, irritability. Let me do something about it. A lot of activists are actively engaging their fight response to a scary situation. We might have a fight response to being stressed at work, in which case we get snappy and irritable or grumpy. You know, those are all types of fight response. And they're very useful. That's the antelope being chased by a lion and running away. Sorry, not running away, so turning around and trying to face up to it and attack it, which is unlikely in the case of an antelope because it knows it's not strong enough, but it's a very useful response. So there may be people in your life or yourselves who are in fight right now. And, you know, of course, we need to mention that we're also in another big planetary crisis. So the planetary crisis that, you know, the elephant in the room right now is the COVID-19 crisis. So let's not forget that we're already in that crisis, even though ultimately climate change and the ecological crisis is far bigger in terms of the impact it's going to have on our planet and on our lives individually and as collectively. right now, a lot of people are already in a very immediate stress response crisis mode to COVID anyway. So you'll see people getting angry and frustrated and arguing about whether they should wear a face mask or slagging off the government or whatever. A lot of that is your classic fight response. So the other way we can deal with a crisis or a fear situation is to go into flight. So again, classically, that's your antelope running away from the lion this time. So I need to just get out of here. So in terms of COVID, that will be people running away from the situation, burying their head in the sand, saying, I don't care what's going on, I'm just going to get on a plane to south of France and sunbathe. And similarly with the climate crisis, we've got a lot of people out there, maybe yourselves, who are just kind of wanting to flee from it, feeling very anxious, feeling very agitated, feeling very flighty, feeling like I want to do something, full of energy. That's your classic flight response. So yourselves or people in your lives, if they're having that response and not actually wanting to fight it, you know, have compassion for that. It's a very valid response to just run away from it. And that's, you know, that's okay. Is anyone aware of the third F? Because this is quite an important one in terms of particularly what's going on with COVID and with the climate crisis. Yeah, we've got a hand there. Do you want to put your microphone on for a second and shout it out, or put it in the chat box? Third F, anyone? Freeze, nice, thank you, Indra. So the freeze response is not typically as well understood. And that's because it's sort of a last resort. So the antelope tries to fight the lion, decides it can't, runs away. And then when it's caught by the lion, when it's got no other options left, when it's really about to die, its body will naturally go into a freeze, which means it plays dead. It actually probably feels quite nice, but it goes into a sort of paralysis. Its cognitive functions shut off. It doesn't think or make decisions, and it just sort of plays dead. Now, the freeze response is a typical response to when things get really bad. And that happens to a lot of us already with COVID, and it's happening to a lot of us with the climate and ecological crisis. Because that is a kind of, oh my God, this is just so overwhelming, and I don't know what to do, and I'm just going to kind of shut down. For some people, it can feel quite nice. It can feel just like a sort of spaced out, dissociated feeling where everything's just a bit unreal. For some people, it can feel like paralytic, is that right? The right word? Levels of anxiety or stuckness or frustration or paralysis, or feeling of just not knowing what to do and not being able to kind of take action in any direction. So again, I want to raise this just to have, you know, for you to have compassion with yourselves and people in your life, if that's what's going on for you, or if that's what's going on for them. And in my experience, one of the best ways to ease that is to have compassion for it, to be gentle with yourself, to self-care, you know, it's such a buzz phrase, but, you know, whatever it is that nourishes you, and to know that that's a valid response and that's okay. And for me, a path out of that is information and knowledge, which is why for me, what I've chosen to do is to learn as much as I can about it and to pass on that information as much as I can, which is why I'm here today. So as we go through, you know, just check in with yourself, be aware that those feelings might be coming up. You might be feeling rage, you might be feeling overwhelm and anxiety, you might be feeling panic. These are all valid responses. Or you might be feeling nothing at all, total numbness, total don't care. And that's absolutely valid and very normal as well. It's part of the freeze response. Okay, so I'd like to just take us kind of right back to the beginning, really, to sort of ask, I'm going to switch to slideshow for just a moment. Oh gosh, how do I do this? Hold on, bear with me. Share screen. Okay, so I'm going to run us through just a couple of slides. Let's screen share. So I wanted to do this on the fly, so I've got a huge amount of slides, but I'm just going to flick through and choose the ones that I feel in the moment are going to be best for this particular presentation. So I'm going to start with this one here. How did we get into this mess? So a quote you might have heard from Sir David Attenborough, everyone's favourite granddad, apparently. We are indeed facing a man-made disaster on a global scale. It's our greatest threat in thousands of years. And this is absolutely true. So if we look at the figures, our world has been getting warmer. And I'm going to go in and out of slide sharing because I want you to be able to hear me as well. So these are the figures over since the 1800s. And this is the average temperature of years as we go through from the 1800s. So you can see that it's absolutely unequivocal that our years have been getting, on average, hotter. So in terms of the actual figures here, 19 of the 20 hottest years have been in the last 20 years. The last 4 years have been the hottest on record. The 2016 was the hottest year ever. You know, this is really happening. Just bear with me, so I'm just finding the right slide. 1 second. Okay, so if I show you this slide here, this will, sorry, I'm not very good at working these different platforms, please forgive me. I'm trying to switch between things. I'm just going to keep sharing my screen, that will probably be easier. So this is another graphic showing how global temperatures have changed over the last 150, 170 years or so. So it's really clear that temperatures have been rising. And they've been, this again in the last, since the 2019 years ago, shows how temperatures have really been going up. So it's absolutely unequivocal. Some skeptics might say, oh, well, they'll show a graph from NASA which shows that, you know, there's one colder year. But actually, that's just basically zooming in on, you know, you can see on this graph here that yes, sometimes a year goes down and then another one goes up and then it goes down. So there are short-term changes for sure, but overall, if we look at the overall picture, the temperatures are absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, they are going up. And we are now 1 degree warmer, about 1.1 actually, than we were at the start of the Industrial Revolution. Now, 1.1 degrees may not sound like very much, but considering how enormous our planet is, it takes an enormous amount of energy, heat energy, to raise the temperature of the planet by 1 degree, an enormous amount. In fact, the equivalent amount of energy is that right now, that's the equivalent energy going into our system to have made it warm by 1 degree, as 5 nuclear bombs going off in our atmosphere every second. That's how much heat energy is going into our atmosphere every second. Now, the obvious question that skeptics say next is like, well, you know, maybe our Earth is just naturally supposed to be heating up right now. Well, I can tell you unequivocally that that's not true, because there's various reasons we know this. So first of all, the arguments people use sometimes is they say that, and this is just from the IPCC, to say that the evidence, I'll come back to what it is, the evidence for man-made warming is unequivocal. In 100 years, it's fossil fuels that have outdone the 5,000 years of natural cooling. We're hotter now than any time since the start of human civilization. And we're catapulting ourselves into uncharted territory. So people often say, okay, maybe it's increased volcanic activity that's making our temperature go up. Maybe it's sunspots or increased heat from the sun. Maybe the sun's changing. And so this top graph shows you that clearly that this is absolutely not true. So the top line is to show the temperature of the Earth over the last 150 years. The bottom line shows the changes in sunspot activity. So it's not the sun, it doesn't correlate. The bottom graph shows you what it is, which is that the temperature is the jiggedy-jaggedy navy blue line, and the white line is the carbon dioxide concentrations in our atmosphere. So it's absolutely definitely carbon dioxide, absolutely mirroring this increase in temperature. So then the next question that certainly skeptics ask, well, okay, is it us that's causing the rising carbon dioxide levels? Maybe it's just that the Earth is naturally increasing its carbon dioxide levels because of natural cycles. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the greenhouse effect, but let me just recap in case anyone isn't. So how do we know that carbon dioxide in itself causes heating? And then we'll come to how we know it's man-made carbon dioxide that is causing the heating. So carbon dioxide in itself causes heating because of what's known as the greenhouse effect. It's not quite like a greenhouse, but it's similar. Is that layers of gases in the atmosphere, such as carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, nitrous oxide, which gets released from chemical fertilizers and animal waste. Methane is released from cow burps, lots and lots of methane from cow burps, and also from paddy fields, from the waterlogged soils in paddy fields. there's bacteria that release methane. So methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide are the most potent and important greenhouse gases. Water vapor is as well, but that's not really changing much. So they act like a fluffy blanket around the Earth, and they trap the heat that is radiating from the surface of the Earth as a result of it being heated by the sun. So this fluffy blanket is important. Without it, our average temperature here on Earth, without our fluffy blanket, would be minus 18 degrees. It'd be far too cold for us to live, because at night it would drop massively below that and we'd all die. So our greenhouse gas layer, our layer of greenhouse gases, is actually very important. But the point is that it stayed the same thickness for about 5,000 years, or actually a lot more, about 12,000 years. And that's how.
What time's your crumpfish for?
Somebody's just put their microphone off mute. Can you remute? Because I can hear you talking to whoever it is. Thank you. So our fluffy blanket, sorry, forgive me using a child sounding analogy. I've just finished writing a kid's book on climate change, so I'm used to talking about fluffy blankets. So our blanket of greenhouse gases has remained the right thickness, perfect for us, for farming, to create the average global temperatures today, which are about 20 degrees, perfect for us. I think it's about 20, about 18 maybe. Perfect for us, and that's exactly how it should be. So we know for sure that it's carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxide that cause more trapping of heat, that cause heating up of the atmosphere. And we know that for sure intellectually, in theory, but we also know it in practice, because there's satellite images that show us infrared radiation being trapped by carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Unequivocal, absolutely no doubt. So the next question then becomes, well, is it us that have released the carbon dioxide, or could it possibly be argued that it's to do with natural cycles? Now, again, forgive me for those of you who are already on board with this, but I just want to give you some arguments to address those skeptics who might be you and your friends and family, or who might be on social media, because I want to really empower you to go out there and be advocates for making sure that people really understand that this is really happening. So just to kind of bring this home, these are carbon dioxide levels over the last 800,000 years. So as you might be aware, over the last 800,000 years, we've had ice ages. And during those ice ages, we cycle in and out about every 100,000 years, as you'll see on this graph. The ice ages are the dips. Are you seeing my cursor, by the way? You are, great. So those dips, here and here and here and here and here, those are ice ages. Now, during an ice age, the carbon dioxide levels, which is what's being shown by this blue graph, are lower. And when you come out of an ice age, they are higher, because more carbon dioxide, thicker fluffy blanket, Earth warms up. And the cycle of natural carbon dioxide levels does indeed take us in and out of the ice ages. How that actually happens is quite complex. I can go into it in the questions if anyone wants to know. But what I want to just get across for now is that the point is that we do have these natural cycles in carbon dioxide, which do trigger, to some extent, the coming in and out of the ice ages. And that's actually initially triggered by changes in the Earth's orbit. They're called Milankovitch cycles, for anyone who's heard of them. Often skeptics use that as a buzz phrase to say, oh, it's Milankovitch cycles. That's why our carbon dioxides are going up. That's why we're heating up. That's not true. In terms of Milankovitch cycles, natural cycles, as you can see by the graph, we should right now be actually going towards our next ice age. About 5,000 years ago, so we came out of our last ice age 12,000 years ago, roughly. For the first 5,000 years of that, 7,000 years of that, our temperatures remained nice and stable, because our fluffy blanket remained the same thickness as it did do during all the other interglacial between ice age periods. And then about 5,000 years ago, naturally, the Earth's cycle, the Earth's orbit started to change again slightly. The carbon dioxide levels would have started to drop, and we would have been going towards our next ice age, which in theory should have been happening. We should be slowly accelerating towards it, and we should be hitting it in about 1,500 years from now. However, as you can see from this graph, that is not what happened. This is actually what happened. So for the last 5,000 years or so, carbon dioxide has been being pumped into the atmosphere and increasing externally the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. Now, to begin with, for the last 12,000 years, it's been to do slowly, bit by bit, with human influence on the planet. So basically farming and agriculture. So first of all, chopping down trees. Now trees as you probably know, absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. If you get rid of trees, you've got less ability to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So the natural levels in the atmosphere start to go up because less is being absorbed. So chopping down trees for agriculture, that was the first challenge. Then they started planting rice to grow rice, and the paddy fields had bacteria in the waterlogged soils which release methane, which adds to the thickness of the blankets, another greenhouse gas. So again, temperatures start to rise. Now this graph only shows carbon dioxide, but if it showed methane, you'd see a massive rise as well. So gradually the blanket's getting thicker, which sort of offsets the fact that naturally it should be getting thinner because the carbon dioxide levels should be starting to fall towards our next ice age. So for the last 5,000 years or so, our fluffy blanket has remained actually roughly the same thickness. So the natural changes going thinner have been counteracted by the human actions, making it get a bit thicker, and it's actually balanced out around the same, which has actually been really good for humans because it's meant that we've had this lovely period called the Holocene, which is perfect for farming, where our temperatures have remained pretty much constant, nice, stable climate, lovely for farming, lovely for human life. But in the last 150 years, everything has started to change radically. So this is what's happened in the last 150 years. Now it's hard to see scale on this because we're sort of using different scale on each graph, but this just shows you how the changes have been happening. So the last 150 years, the levels of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere in terms of emissions, so this is emissions per year. So this is not just overall levels, this is actually how much carbon dioxide has been emitted per year. So for any of you who have any understanding of maths, this is like a double whammy. Emissions are going up, plus the rate at which they're going up is going up. So don't worry if you don't understand that. The point is that even since our first awarenesses of the fact that our fluffy blanket's getting thicker, so the assessments by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the Paris Agreement, which some of you probably know about, which was 2016, they said, right, we really need to limit global warming to 2 degrees. It's currently at 1 degree. They say we have to stay below 2 degrees. And really, we should stay below 1.5 degrees warming compared to the Industrial Revolution. And in order to do that, it became clear in the next few years through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that in order to do that, we absolutely must keep warming below 1.5 degrees, and we must do that by getting to net zero. So no more carbon dioxide or methane or nitrous oxide emissions unless it's being sucked in by technology, which by the way doesn't yet exist, so we cannot rely on it to get us to overall zero. So there's no extra emissions from humans. That's the plan, but it's absolutely not what's happening. So we know for sure that it's human action. So burning fossil fuels releases a lot of carbon dioxide. Fossil fuels are made of dead plants and sea creatures that have been trapped under the earth for millions of years, and all the carbon in their bodies has been compressed and turned into oil or coal or natural gas. Great for producing energy. When you burn them, it releases energy, but terrible because when you burn it, the carbon turns into carbon dioxide and that goes into the atmosphere, adding to our fluffy blanket. Increased deforestation over the last 150 years has meant that there's huge amounts of carbon dioxide, not just not being absorbed because of the loss of trees, but also actually being released because when those trees are burnt, all that excess carbon that's stored in the trees then gets released back into the atmosphere. And there's, as I said earlier, more and more cows and sheep are being farmed for meat and for dairy. Their burps release huge amounts of methane, much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, huge amounts of extra heat trapping. Intensive agriculture has led to even more deforestation, plus it's caused churning up of the soils. Soils are a huge trap, a huge sink, we call it, of carbon, holding on to a lot of carbon. In intensive agriculture, the soils get churned up. That releases a lot of the trapped carbon in the soil, which goes back into becoming carbon dioxide in the air. Plus, intensive agriculture means that land has to be cleared for farming, chopping down trees, burning the trees, releasing more carbon dioxide. Plus, intensive agriculture uses a lot of chemical fertilizers. Those fertilizers release nitrous oxide, another greenhouse gas. Plus, you've got livestock farming, and livestock farming uses a huge amount of land, again, more deforestation. And the manure from the sheep and from the cows, again, releases nitrous oxide. So more and more in the last 150 years since the Industrial Revolution, humans have been releasing like extortionate amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. It's absolutely for sure that that's been happening, that it's human caused, and that it's not, well, it's slowing down very slightly, mostly because of COVID, but it's not slowing down nearly enough as it needs to in order to stop catastrophic damage to our planet. So what's going to happen as a result of this? So I'm sure a lot of you are already aware that we're seeing more extreme weather. Climate change has already changed our weather impacts, weather patterns, and having adverse effects on people's lives. Yes, in this country, but even more so in other parts of the globe that haven't done anything to cause this crisis. And the way to get around that is to start cutting carbon emissions. So in terms of extreme weather, people often ask me, well, okay, it's getting a bit hot, but only 1 degree, that can't be very much. Well, of course, but the point is just 1 degree of warming, because of all this 5 atomic bombs worth of energy every second, means that we get much more chance of heat waves, we get much more chance of extreme heat and prolonged periods of heating in parts of the world. But what a lot of people don't realise is we also get a lot more rainfall. So in areas where it's already hot and dry, it gets even hotter and even drier. So we get droughts and water shortages and heat stress and people suffering, people not being able to work in the fields because it's too hot, people suffering from heat exhaustion and heat-related deaths, which is well documented and attributable to climate change. But also in areas where it's already damp, because of the extra heat in the atmosphere, we get more evaporation of water from the oceans. When more water evaporates from the oceans, we get more water vapor in the air. And where it's already cool and damp enough for that water vapor to condense to form clouds, you get more clouds and you get more frequent rainfall and you get more intense and heavier downpours. So global warming, climate change, is causing heat waves, droughts and water shortages in some areas, and in other areas it's causing floods, more extreme storms, more extreme hurricanes, because they are heightened by this extra rainfall. They suck up more rain and then they dump it in torrential rain, and we get monsoons. And these are a direct result of climate change. The number of extreme climate-related disasters has doubled since the 1990s. Now, often people say, oh, but less people are getting killed. Well, yes, because we've got more awareness and ability to evacuate people and get them out of the way in time. But actually the costs is what is the real indication of how bad the situation is getting, because the costs are just skyrocketing. We also get more wildfires because dry and hot, dry areas, of course, leads to the triggering of more forest fires. And these are all absolutely verified facts attributable to climate change or made more likely, tens or hundreds of times more likely due to climate change. This is just a graphic where you can see that over the last, since 1981, these are showing the areas of the world that are heating up. So the red ones are areas that are getting warmer, and the blue ones are, of course, there are always going to be some areas that are going down a bit, but you can hopefully see that actually pretty much all of them have gone up. And the fact is it's going to get a lot worse, where these records are going to be broken in a few years, all the heat records. July 2019 was the hottest month ever. It's already, I think, 46% chance that even so far that 2020 is going to be the hottest year ever, and they're going to get a lot worse. We're going to see more forest fires, we're going to see more big hurricanes like Harvey, and it's going to get worse for us here, and it's going to get disproportionately worse for those in less advantaged areas of the world, and we have a responsibility to look after them as well. So really, we should be listening to the scientists and people who are already being affected by extreme weather. They're seeing it with their own eyes, they're suffering from it. We're not going to be able to cope with where we're going in the future. And we have to start cutting carbon emissions as quickly as humanly possible. Another impact of global warming, as I'm sure you know, is that ice melts in the Arctic and in the Antarctic, also in glaciers. And as a result of ice melting, well, first of all, you've got poor Arctic creatures like polar bears who can't get enough food to eat because they haven't got sea ice to stand on to hunt for seals. They're invading towns in northern Russia because to try and scavenge through rubbish bins. But just as worrying, more worrying really, is that when the ice melts on land, so ice sheets like in Greenland and in Antarctica, and also glaciers, never know how to pronounce that. When the ice melts, it runs off into rivers and into the sea, and that causes rises in sea levels. Also, it threatens to cut off fresh water supplies for millions of people living downstream of the glaciers that depend on them for fresh water. If they melt, then there's no fresh water in those areas. Really big problem. And we're already seeing sea level rise, and it's kind of happening much faster than was expected. But the important point is that we're heading, even by 2050, to a place at which sea level rises are going to threaten to flood the homes of hundreds of millions of people at least once a year, because that's where they are in terms of the high tide level once a year. The highest tide will be below sea level once those sea levels rise by 2050. And by the end of the century, we're talking hundreds of millions of people who will be living below high tide every day. So they will be flooded daily unless they relocate. By 2050, at the rate where we're heading, at the rate we're going, then areas around the coastline in the UK will be particularly badly affected. So there's areas in the UK around the coasts and around the rivers, central London, the south coast, that will be again flooded yearly, if not daily, by 2050 at the rate we're going. So it's going to have a huge impact on us. I'm going to skip through that slide. I just want to talk briefly about ocean life. So the warming is also causing creatures in the ocean to suffer from marine heat waves, killing or damaging a lot of ocean creatures. And coral reefs are pretty much on their last legs. In the next 10 years, they're going to be down by 75-ish%, and by 2050, by nearly 100%, 99%, if we don't take radical action right now. And coral reefs are not just beautiful, but 1 million sea creatures depend on them, and 1 billion humans depend on coral reefs for food, for livelihood, for tourism, for protection from storms. And also we've got increased carbon dioxide being absorbed by the oceans and creating acidification, making them more acidic in the oceans, which dissolves the seashells of creatures living in it and is causing huge damage as well. Deforestation, we've already talked about. I'm going to move through that. But because of deforestation and because of the damage to our soils, right now, people are saying that we're 30 to 40, 50, 60 years away from eradication of soil fertility. Which brings me on to the fact that the damage to our soils, coupled with the extreme weather changes because of climate change, means that we're going to be seeing crop failures because it's going to be too hot to grow crops, or there's going to be too much flooding to grow crops, and we're going to have too much damage to the soil to grow crops. And the result of that is that our crops are already becoming less nutritious. We're already seeing crop failures. Over the next 10, 20, 30 years, there'll be a much greater chance that we'll see simultaneous crop failures in other parts of the globe at the same time because of extreme weather events. And of course, we are an internationally dependent country here. We depend on a lot of our food, we depend on imports. So we import about 50% of our food, 70 to 80% of our fruit and vegetables. So if crops fail in other parts of the globe, it will impact us eventually, whether it's food shortages or whether it's just price hikes, and then the poorest are not going to be able to feed themselves. And it's also going to impact us in terms of water shortages, because we're already seeing areas of the country such as London who are pushing close to capacity in terms of what they can provide. And when we get more storms and more floods, and we get more flooding, we get more contamination of the water supplies, we get more droughts, more heat waves, then that's going to be more and more challenging to have fresh water, even in this country. I want to talk just for a second about one particular type of agriculture, which I'm sure many of you know about, is livestock production and how particularly damaging that is. So livestock production is particularly damaging because of how much land livestock take up. They take up 4/5 of our farmland, but they actually only provide us with about 1/3 of our protein. So they're a huge source of deforestation. They're a huge source of methane emissions. They're a huge source of nitrous oxide from the animal poo. And they're taking up 1/3 of our croplands are grown simply to feed these animals. It would be far more efficient and far better for our planet if we just grew more crops. Yes, we'd have to take up a bit more land than we currently do to replace what we'd lose from animals. But I'm moving on now for a second into solutions, and I'll take a pause in just a second before I do that. But scientists are now saying that if we're going to stay below the 2-degree mark, which is what the Paris Agreement has said is absolutely essential, then we're going to need to see in this country a 90% reduction in the amount of meat and dairy that we eat, particularly beef, lamb, and milk and dairy. Yeah, just one more thing, is the air and also biodiversity. I'll mention those very quickly. So the air pollution is an enormous issue, causing enormous health problems across the globe. 8 million people a year die from air pollution. That's a lot of people. 24 people a day in London. And that is indirectly a result of burning of fossil fuels as well. We've also got other impacts on human health. So increased temperatures mean that infectious diseases are more likely to be passed on and to thrive. They're more likely to also be cropping up in other areas of the world, which is what we're already seeing. We've got malaria coming up in parts of Europe. We've got Zika virus coming up in parts of the UK. So increased temperatures are already and will continue to have huge impacts on human health. And just finally, the biodiversity crisis, before I move on into solutions. So don't worry, I will get there. The biodiversity crisis, I'm just going to flick to find that, is just as important as our climate crisis. So we depend on our wildlife. We depend on tiny insects to pollinate our crops. We depend on whales to circulate ocean currents to bring fresh water to the surface so that plankton can feed off it, so that they can absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We depend on elephants to, they're known as forest gardeners. They eat some of the smaller shrubs in the forest so that the bigger ones can grow and they can then trap carbon. We depend on a myriad of tiny creatures. We depend on coral reefs for protection from storms. And nature is now declining at unprecedented rates. We've lost 60% of the local population sizes of countless numbers of creatures since the 1960s. And at the rate we're going, over the next few decades, a staggering 1 million more creatures are threatened with extinction over the next few decades due to human action. So we have, nature is not just beautiful, but we depend on it, and we absolutely have to take radical action to stop the damage to our wildlife right now. And in fact, scientists are even saying that it's not just that we're going down in numbers, but species are going extinct at such a fast rate that we're entering what's known as the 6th mass extinction event. The last 5 happened in our way back prehistoric past, but this time it's due to human action. So we have to take action on all of these things. So I'm just going to transfer back to stop sharing my screen. Here we go. So I just want to talk for just a couple of minutes before I come into solutions, is what we need to do. So what we need to do, it's super clear, is that we have to bring carbon emissions, all greenhouse gas emissions down to net zero ASAP. Now, the Paris Agreement said we need to do that to stay below 2 degrees. The IPCC has told us the impacts of 1.5 degrees, that's 1.5 degrees hotter than pre-industrial times. Remember, we're now at 1 degree hotter. And it's clear, it's absolutely clear that we're already seeing massive impacts, and that every fraction of a degree counts. Every tiny little thing anyone can do right now does matter, but we absolutely must stay below 1.5 degrees heating compared to pre-industrial levels, and absolutely below 2 degrees. Now, we are currently on target at the moment, with all the pledges currently in place by the governments. We're on target to get to pass 1.5 degrees around 2030. That's staggering. That's like in the next 10 years. That's where we're never supposed to get to. And we're currently on track to get to 2 degrees by around 2050. Now, 2050 is when we've promised to get to carbon zero, net zero across the globe in order to stay below 1.5 degrees, but we're actually on target to get to 2 degrees at that point. So, sorry, I've just got a message from Buddhafield, really bizarre, in my email. So we are on target to be completely at odds with where the governments are telling us we are. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous. And they're not taking the action that they're promising to take anyway. So we're on target to get to 1.5 degrees around 2030, 2 degrees around 2050, and a staggering 3 or 4 degrees by the end of the century, which is widely known by scientists to be absolutely unthinkable, and to take us towards the possibility of societal collapse, world wars, huge food shortages, even about 2 degrees, so around 2050, we're looking at 1 in every 2 people across the globe facing food or water shortages. 1 in every 2 people, 5 billion people, just by 2050. And by the end of the century, we're on target for 3 or 4 degrees. Now, the government are saying across the globe that they're bringing carbon emissions down to get to carbon zero by 2050, but that would only give us a 50-50 chance of staying below 1.5 degrees. I mean, that's crazy odds to even be aiming for that. And the point is, we're aiming for that, but we're nowhere close to being able to get there. So the latest report, which some of you might have heard about or read from the Committee on Climate Change, who are the government's, our UK government's advisors, who tell the government what they need to be doing to bring carbon emissions down. The report came out just last month to say that out of the 21 key indicators that the government was supposed to show over the past year to show that we're on track to meet the carbon budgets to get us to net zero by 2050, which isn't even enough anyway, only 4 of 21 were on track. These are 21 like absolute bare minimum of what we need to do. And of the 31 milestones for action that were recommended by the Committee on Climate Change in order to get to carbon zero by 2050, only 2 have been achieved. I mean, that's insane. And we're off track to meet any of our carbon budgets over the next few years. Not only that, but the Committee on Climate Change are now saying to the government, we need to start preparing, you need to start preparing people for a 4-degree world. So they're basically going, well, yeah, this is where we are, this is where we're heading. But the point is, we can still stop this. We absolutely can still stop this. We haven't got much time. The window of time to change this is very small. You know, we're talking really in the next kind of 6 months to a year, and how we come out of COVID is absolutely crucial. How we bring our economy out of COVID and how we bring our society out of COVID. But there is time to stop this, but we've got to act radically and we've got to act fast. So in terms of action, really the only thing that is going to be effective now is collective action. You know, we can't just think, oh, you know, we can just do a little bit ourselves and it'll be okay. The government, sorry to be political here, but kind of have to, the government are telling us that it's our responsibility to get themselves off the hook. Even if we did all personal action we could, it absolutely will not be enough. So it's a bit of a smokescreen. It's a bit of a just false economy. So what we really need to be doing is coming together and taking collective action, whatever that looks like for you, whether that's campaigning, whether that's lying on the street and refusing to move, whether that's gluing yourself to a building, whether that's writing to your MP, whatever that is, it needs to be collective. In terms of individual action, because I did promise I would give you some hope that you can do, and then we're going to open to questions in just a moment. In terms of individual action, it's not enough to do anything individually, but almost for your own peace of mind, so you at least feel empowered, I'm going to let you know what the most powerful bits of personal action you can do, and pretty much anything I don't mention, there's not really much point. So the most powerful things you can do, as I've already mentioned, is to go plant-based in your diet. So ideally vegetarian or vegan, but even just cutting down on particularly beef and lamb and dairy is one of the most significant things you personally can do. But doing that isn't going to be enough. The other thing you can personally do that's most significant is stopping flying. So flying, firstly, it encourages us to travel internationally, which emits huge amounts of carbon dioxide through burning the petrol and the fuel. And also flying emits a huge amount more carbon dioxide than traveling the same distance by boat, by train, or by car. So cutting down flying is for me, is a no-brainer. Cutting down on using the car at all, ideally, is something that you can do, taking public transport, particularly trains, particularly international trains, because they run off electricity, which more and more is becoming fueled by renewables rather than by fossil fuels. So renewables being wind, solar power, tidal energy, also possibly nuclear. It's not quite renewable, but it's clean. So these are the types of energy we should be looking out for in terms of our transport. Electric cars, they're not a magic bullet. They don't completely reduce carbon emissions and they don't completely reduce air pollution, but they're definitely better than a standard car. But even better is public transport, ride sharing, cycling, walking. And the other significant thing you can do is to switch to a green energy provider for your home electricity. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference, certainly not enough, but it's definitely something you can do. look out for one that actually gets their energy directly from renewable sources, because there's lots that kind of say they do and they're not great. And fourthly and finally, is to look into where you're investing any money that you might still happen to have in these crazy lack of resources times. So any money you do have, look into what your bank is doing with your money. 35 of the biggest banks globally, including some of the really big names in the UK, such as HSBC and Barclays, are continuing to invest people's money in fossil fuels. So there's some really great websites where you can look at how green your money is, if you have any money. So those are kind of the biggest things that can do action. You can also get involved with conservation projects, like they're called rewilding projects, which you've probably heard of, growing your own vegetables, looking out for fruit and vegetables that have been grown locally, but only in season, because if they've not been grown in season, they've been grown using heated greenhouses, so it sort of offsets the benefit. So buying stuff that's been grown locally, cutting down, and one final important thing, sorry I said 4, but there's actually 6. One final important thing is looking at consumerism. So here in the UK, people always say, oh, but our carbon footprint's really small here in the UK. Well, it's still twice as much as it should be per head in terms of the global average. So that's huge. But more importantly is that that's because we outsource most of our carbon emissions abroad. So we say, hey, look how good we are. We're already using wind power and our carbon emissions are already dropping a bit. Well, they are a bit on our own turf. But in terms of where we get most of our products, most of our clothes, most of our, yes, cutting down on our central heating and hot water. Yeah, good point, using more blankets. But we outsource most of our carbon emissions with what we buy, clothes, goods, white goods, electrics. It all comes, well, not all, most of it comes from China, and then they're being blamed for our carbon emissions. So we can take a good look at, upcycling, recycling, repairing, charity shops buying, just cutting down on buying new stuff. And if we do need to buy stuff that's made to last rather than fast fashion. I know I'm preaching to the converted, but you might have kids, educate them as to why fast fashion is particularly bad, because it needs replacing, and then they have to just buy more stuff. So encourage them to mend and repair, to upcycle, to have kind of like, to change the use. I can't remember what it's called when you kind of like find new uses for your old items. So that's been a lot of information. I'm getting a sore throat because I spoke so fast. We've had the hour that was allotted to talking about what's actually going on. So I'd like to open up to some questions just for about 5 minutes or so, because the 90-minute basically gives us another sort of 25 minutes from now. So the idea is that we spend the first 10 minutes or so addressing any questions, but first of all, we're going to take a breather, which I'll do in a second. And then we're going to just do a little bit of kind of like discussion. Can I share the slides? Yes, Amber, perhaps you can let me know how to do that at a later date. I will send them through to Amber. Yes, sorry, where did I get to? My ADHD brain has just got slightly side-swerved. So we're going to do some questions, and then we'll just, for the last 10 minutes or so, I'm going to give you a space to reflect on your experiences, to reflect on how this has been for you, to reflect on what's come up for you, and to reflect on where it's left you emotionally and what actions, even tiny, small, seemingly insignificant actions you might be able to take in your own life, just to at least help you to feel empowered, and then perhaps what bigger actions you might be able to take as a result. Check out repair cafes. Nice, lovely idea. Okay, so no, that was a private message to me, so I'll read that out because that's a really helpful comment. Perhaps you didn't want to be named, so I won't name you. Beyond flying, driving, and etc., green energy suppliers cutting down on our, oh, it's you, hi Paul, you posted it just to me. So cutting out on our central heating and hot water is an output of carbon dioxide we can have direct personal control over, but it's taboo to talk about. Reduce consumption personally, drastically. Lovely, really important. So that's why, that was my comment about using more blankets, that you probably thought I was talking madness because you hadn't seen the comment. So yes. Okay, so let's just take a moment. I don't know about you, but I feel slightly wired from all that past information. So let's just take a moment to ground into, thank you, Kinwei, for me a kiss, to ground into our bodies and to kind of just settle into absorbing what's just what's just been shared. So yeah, let's take some deep breaths. So I invite you, if you feel comfortable, to just get into a comfortable position where you're sitting or lying or propped up. And let's close our eyes if you feel comfortable to do that. And I invite you to bring your awareness to your feet. And yes, Paul, if you want to share any links, just share them publicly in the chat. Wonderful. You don't need to message privately. So bring your awareness to your feet and just feel the contact between your feet and the floor, the ground, the chair, wherever they are. Feel that there's something solid holding you, connecting you to this planet that we've been talking about, that's suffering as a result of our actions. It's still here, it's still holding us. We may suffer, but the planet ultimately will survive. And now bringing your awareness to any other parts of your body that are in contact with the chair, the seat, the bed. Bringing your awareness to your bottom, your back, and just breathing into those parts of your body. And then we're going to take a few deep breaths. So we're going to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. We're going to breathe slightly, we're going to make the out breath slightly longer than the in breath. So that's scientifically proven. Any of you familiar with the polyvagal theory or the theory of nervous system regulation? It's proven that if we elongate the out breath slightly longer than the in breath, it activates our parasympathetic nervous system that calms our fight or flight response and helps us to feel more regulated. So in a moment, we're going to breathe in for a count of 5 through the nose, hold for 2, and out for a count of 7 through the mouth. Before we start, I invite you to put a hand or both hands onto any part of your body that might be feeling scared or frightened, anxious, overwhelmed, angry, blocked, numb. And as you breathe, I invite you to breathe into your hands. Relax the shoulders, open the chest slightly, relax the jaw, and we're going to take some deep breaths. So we breathe in through the nose, 2, 3, 4, 5, hold 1, 2, and out through the mouth, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and again, in, 2, 5, hold, out, 2, 5, 6, 7. We're going to do one more, and I'm not going to count this time so that I get to do it too. So let's go in, hold, and out. And we'll do one last one all together, and this time we're just going to take a big noisy breath in through our nose, and then on the out breath I invite you to make a big noisy sigh to get all of the out. So let's breathe in through our nose, and then a big if you feel able to, depending who you're sharing a room with right now. And one more all together, in through the nose. Give yourself a stretch if you want to, if you feel comfortable, and a big Okay, so let's take questions for a few minutes. So Paul has shared a resource on corona ecology and psychotherapy. So I'll leave you to, lovely suggestion. So I'll leave you to read that.
The YouTube link.
Great, thanks,
if anyone's
Paul.
interested. Been in this a long time.
Lovely, thanks for those resources, Paul, that's great.
Yeah.
So any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box, or feel free to just put on your microphone, put your hand up, like a finger up, and we'll, suggestions for burnout, great question. Thank you, Kim Wei, yes, question that's very close to both of our hearts, thanks for the prompt on that one. So suggestions for burnout, radical self-care. Getting yourself, giving yourself permission not to have to do it all, giving yourself permission to not do anything for a while, because actually you can't make a difference very well or do very much. I know this all too well for myself, if you yourself are not feeling okay. So put yourself first. For you to be the best you can be for the planet, you need to be the best you can be for yourself first. So whatever that is for you, whether it's taking, if you're able to, some time out to lie in the sun, whether it's having a bath, whether it's watching a favorite series on Netflix, getting support. I've got a therapist, I've got a trauma therapist and a talking therapist and various other physical forms of body work that I do. Get those resources, read resources, know that you're not alone, know that this is a very common thing, is to be feeling overwhelmed. There's a lot of articles. There's a great article actually that I did an interview for recently, which was eco-anxiety. If I can find it, I'll post it in the chat box, which was about dealing with eco-anxiety. So yeah, read resources, watch talks, know that you're not alone on that. Where is it? Eco-anxiety. Can I find it? No.
My suggestion would be do less. I have a little slogan I use with students of mine saying, do less for sustainability, because doing less consumes fewer resources and produces less waste. And emotionally, it's more sustainable too. We all need to be doing less, consuming less.
I've just posted the PDF, not supposed to have given that out, but never mind, to the article on eco-anxiety in the Women's Magazine that I did an interview for recently. So there's a lot of, might be helpful stuff in there. I want to come to Kinway's question, if individual action isn't enough, is there a reason why we should do it? Yes. Firstly, because whilst it's not enough, it still does make a difference. So every fraction of a degree that we can keep our temperatures down by makes a difference. Every tiny fraction. So the way I see it is that every time, I'm a real meat eater. I find it really hard not to eat meat. But I've stopped eating beef and lamb, and I'm trying with the rest. And I kind of think every time I don't have beef, it could save a life. It is that specific. But it's not enough on its own, because we've got to take collective action overall to save the planet. But I've also committed to not flying. Now, I used to fly a lot internationally for work, to give talks, and to run training programs on communication skills for scientists. Now, you'd think that's quite important work, but actually, as someone who has a position to be able to have a platform to talk about what I'm doing, for me, the most important thing I can do is to not fly and to advocate the fact that, COVID's made a massive difference to this, that academics, experts can give talks over Zoom, over Skype, even pre-COVID and certainly post-COVID, that we shouldn't be getting back on planes and going back to conferences ever again. Or you get a local expert to do that. So yes, individual action can make a bit of a difference, but also it's important for self-empowerment. So to feel that as long as, yeah, great, thank you, Bex, I can see you. So as long as if it's making you feel good and feel like you're making a difference, then that will help you to then have a clearer sense of what you can do more collectively to help more collective action. And thirdly, and this applies specifically, good question, specifically to me as a communicator, is that I don't want to be accused of being a hypocrite, because it's such a common argument that skeptics make. It's like, oh, well, you think it's that climate change is such a big deal. I don't see you doing anything about it. And I'm like, well, actually I am. I don't have a car. Even before COVID, I've committed to not flying anymore. And I've radically reduced the amount of beef and lamb and cow dairy that I eat and drink. That's me not being a hypocrite. But we live in a fossil fuel society. We cannot change it by simply not using fossil fuels, because our economy, our system is not set up to do that, which is why we need top-down systemic change, and that can only be brought about from the top. So was it Bex who had a question? And
yeah, just very quickly, I just want to acknowledge what Paul was talking about, living simply. Sorry, just so you feel heard. Yeah, I think there's something really in that about we've got too much choice and just actually living more simply. So I just want to acknowledge that what you said. There's too much to ask. There's too much to ask you, Emily. And as someone with anxiety, it does feel very overwhelming. I worked in the environmental sector for years, managing energy saving advice teams, renewable energy installation. But it's easy to forget because it gets so technical, all the information, even when you're talking. Yeah, I should remember. But my questions are, I've got loads, but are they going to phase gas boilers out? Because why are we still putting gas boilers in? You know, one thing. Two, sometimes I don't feel like I'm doing enough, but I'm actually running a vegan catering business, and I've just realised by you talking, actually I'm doing a lot. Yeah. And the other thing is, I live in quite a challenging area because I bought here to have a low mortgage when I set my business up 3 years ago. And I really want to do something in the area because it's very working class. People haven't got a lot of money. They buy, like maybe throwaway fashion, things like that. So I really want to do something on the ground, like a community project. And I'm just thinking, what's the best one is there a model I can follow? I know different organisations run theirs, but yeah, it's just like getting people, working class people and local people engaged and give them information that's easy to understand, because they're not given the information half the time. So yeah, sorry, this is a bit more of a comment than a question, but yeah, do you know of any community projects that I could actually run locally and get people involved? If I do get this cafe locally, then I can, as a community cafe, I'm going to make it like an eco community cafe. But it's on probably the roughest street in Glasgow where I've got the opportunity. So it's probably the best place to have it. But yeah, anyway, sorry. Too much to ask you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to say it sounds like you're already doing an enormous amount.
Yeah.
And that every little makes a huge difference.
Yeah, thanks.
Gandhi said, I forget the exact wording, but it's like if we all just did what we were capable of doing, it would solve all the world's problems. So we're already doing a huge amount with the vegan business and with wanting to make change. I don't know any resources for the sorts of projects you're looking for, but I'm sure there'll be a huge amount of stuff on the web that you can get involved with.
Yeah.
Similarly, the person who asked a question on resources for fuels for diesel cars, again, it's not something I know about. Diesel generally is not great, nor is petrol. Electric is better. But in terms of better fuels for those, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm sure it'd be available information online. There's a couple of people okay, so yeah, Extinction Rebellion plans, I'll come back to you earlier in a second. So yes, there's going to be a rebellion in September, the end of August. Really important that those of us who have the luxury of being able to take time off work, the luxury of being able to be willing to be arrested, which I know it's not a luxury for a lot of people, particularly around race issues. But that's a huge way that you can make a difference, is to get out on the streets. You don't need to be arrestable. I certainly don't want to be arrested because I work with kids, and I don't want to be limited in terms of being able to work with kids in the future. But I've been on the streets the last 2 rebellions, as has Kimway, and that's a big way to do things. So that's coming up in September. You can go on the Extinction Rebellion website, rebellion.earth, to find that out. There's a big thing coming up here. Oh God, too many people. I mean, yeah. Okay, let's just let half the planet die. I mean, that's one. But then what if that happens to be your best friend or your partner or your child? I mean, that's the obvious argument to that. It's very hard to know how to address them then. So yes, Kimway has a comment about burnout, and actually, Kimway, I wanted to ask you if you'd be willing to address the questions about race inequality, because it's a really important question. So intersectionality, basically, between climate change and race inequality, both in terms of its effects globally and in terms of collective actions or direct resources. I don't have resources, but Kimway might do. And also, Kimway, there's a question about changes relating to poverty. So that's another intersectionality between inequality. So yeah, if I can pass over to you, Kimway, if you want to say, if you have anything to share on that, because
okay, sure. So Yeah, so I'll say the burnout point first. So I just have a direct experience of the effects of burnout because I was very close to a climate scientist who worked for 7 years.
Not me.
In that, no, and in that time, they, as soon as they found out how bad the situation was, their approach really was, how can I justify taking even one day off when the situation is so bad? And I've come to realize that really the question they should have been asking themselves is, how can I justify heading towards burnout when the situation is so bad? Because actually they burnt out 4 years ago and they haven't been able to work since. So if they never work again, we'll have lost their entire, 30, 40 years of their career potentially. If they start to work again in the next year, we've still lost them for 4 years. So that really shook me and taught me that the question I really need to be asking myself is, given how serious the situation is, how can I justify sending myself towards burnout? How could I justify not taking a day off when I need it? And so I just wanted to share that with you. And then regarding race inequality, so I'm not quite sure what the question is. One thing I can think of that does address it is, I remember when I was close to that climate scientist looking at global studies regarding extreme weather and extreme weather events. And they said, have you noticed that all the extreme weather events on this global record seem to be in richer countries? Why do you think that is? And I said, karma. And they said that in actual fact, what it is that the developing countries, the poorer countries in the world, don't actually even have the equipment to measure their own weather. So it's not that fewer things are happening, it's actually probably more, but they're not able to measure it so well because of that kind of difference in status. So one way that makes people more vulnerable is that if extreme weather can be predicted, then people can move out of the way. So not only do we have situations where the world's poorest are going to be more affected, and they have fewer resources as it is, but fewer resources as it is when those disasters hit, but they potentially also have less ability to find out. So I think that's really important for us. And also a lot of the developing countries' economies are dependent. It's global south, isn't it? Sorry, they're dependent on us continuing to consume. So whichever way you look at it, they're more affected. They're more affected by the weather changes, and they're more affected by the changes that will need to be made for us to use less carbon. I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm going to stop now and find out.
So thank you, Kimmo. That was really, really helpful. And yeah, I mean, I was just going to confirm scientifically that yes, the extreme weather events, really catastrophically extreme weather events, are far more likely in places in the global south, because they're already places that are already hot, that are already humid, that are already suffering from storms and monsoons and floods, and they're just getting a lot worse. So they are disproportionately impacted in terms of the effects of climate change. They've had a far lower impact far lower responsibility in terms of causing it. And yes, they've not got the abilities to actually get out of the way and predict it and stuff. So yeah, it's a huge race problem, huge race inequality problem. Now I'm aware we've only got 5 more minutes. So if there was anyone who had a burning last question, I think I've addressed all the ones in the chat box, but if there's anything I've missed, or if there's a burning last question, just put your hand up now. Okay, all right, cool. So in our last 5 minutes, Kimwei, did you have a suggestion in the last 5 minutes? Actually, no, I think what would be nice to do, just to kind of ground this and to close off, is just for people to be able to kind of offer any feelings or reflections on how that's been for you. Because I think often when something quite big and intense has come up, when we've received a lot of quite scary or frustrating or angering or upsetting information, then it's sometimes quite helpful just to be able to be heard, just to be able to voice or to write in the chat box how that's been for you. So the question I would like us to just reflect on for these last 5 minutes is, it's a sort of two-part question, and feel free to reflect on either part, is, you know, how was that for you? How are you feeling right now? You know, let's just be present with what's going on for you. How are you feeling right now? And what one, as insignificant as it might feel or sound, action can you, or do you want to do differently or take, even if it's just explaining it to your mum, or, you know, telling your kids not to shop at Topshop, or whatever it is. Doesn't matter how big or small, or it could be, you know, heading up your own protest, whatever. What one action, big or small, might you feel able or empowered or educated to take as a result of the session this morning? So it's a two-part question. Feel free to reflect on either part. How are you feeling as a result of what we've all just shared together? And what positive action do you feel you can take, big or small? And I invite you to think on it for yourself. Perhaps write it down for yourself if that's what works for you. Perhaps share it in the chat box. Or if you're someone like myself who it helps me to process by being heard, by actually speaking out loud, then feel free to put your hand up or indicate that you'd like to share something into the space. How do you pronounce your name? Kamaladi?
That's good enough.
Go for it.
Yeah, it's Kamaladi.
Nice to meet you.
No worries. Yeah, it's been really strong. I massively appreciate all your hard work and your lovely delivery. And actually, oddly enough, what I'm feeling is reassured because of you telling the truth. Yeah, and what I want to do initially, because this is both helpful for me and the planet, is grow even more food, because I love gardening. And I have people to visit, and it inspires them to grow and to compost, and all good for connection, really.
Beautiful. Kamaladi, thank you. That's such a beautiful share. I really appreciate your appreciation. As you can, it's hard for all of us with doing what we want and can do. And wonderful if you can start to be more sustainable for your own food. That's just a brilliant thing you can do. Thank you. And I also just want to reflect on your appreciation, to say that it's clear to me that what my special power is on the planet, and we all have one, is to explain stuff. So this is just my action. My action is I can explain it to people, and hopefully me explaining it will make them take action, which actually makes a difference. So I feel nothing better than knowing that might have some impact. So thank you. Nothing better for me is what I said. Paul, yes, go for it.
Well, I also feel reassured in the sense that finally it's out in the public domain, all of this, because I've been concerned and working in this for 50 years. I mean, literally 50 years. I started getting concerned about extinctions when I was 7 years old. I love these kids that are out there doing it, because I was no one to do it with. But I've also got this stomach churning sense of deja vu, because until we actually, each of us, everybody, sees ourselves as part of the planet rather than the planet as something to rescue, our mentality isn't going to change. And on that basis, the action is that I do and would encourage and will continue doing is in that spirit to be aware of every little thing that we do, little things, including using plastic pens, the amount of toilet paper we use, right? Let's actually work to reduce what we do. And there's a 1992 documentary I've put on the chat there, which I show to all my students and have done for 20 years. And it's a very old BBC documentary, but it's available on YouTube, and it gets more and more relevant every year, because it actually explains the ecology, gets beyond the issues to explain the basic ecology of how it all works. And I'd recommend it to everybody. There we are.
Thank you so much, Paul. So we do have to close the room in a moment. I'm going to put into the chat box my email address and also my website. If you want to pass on my information to anyone else, feel free to point them towards my website. My email address is also on there. If you want to get in touch with me personally, do drop me an email. I can't promise I'll be able to answer climate change questions by email, but if you wanted to engage with working together, or you have an idea of somewhere else that I could give a talk, or someone else that I could liaise with, so that I can get my message out there more easily. If you've got kids, I've got a book on what's going on the planet coming out, not till next spring now, but look out for it. I've got my first book, Brain-fizzing Facts, was out last August. So if you've got kids sort of primary schoolish age, look out for that. Helps to educate them generally about science. And then the next book, that's the sort of primer, and then the next book is going to be like, this is what's going on, but this is how you can help. Very much hope driven. So feel free to keep in touch. If you're on Twitter, I'm at Dr. Emily Grossman. Please do tweet me. I get a lot of shit, shall we say, from climate deniers and skeptics and stuff. So please, if you've enjoyed it and you've appreciated it, please do tweet me, and then I can share that. And then hopefully I'll have more opportunities to give talks like this in the future to raise awareness. But I think that's us for now. I think we need to close the room. Thank you to Amber for facilitating. Thank you to Kimway for helping to answer questions and just generally keeping me calm. I've been in and out of burnout pretty much permanently for the last year, and Kimway has been my absolute saviour for that, and has kept telling me that actually, no, it's more important I look after myself if I'm going to look after the planet. So thank you all for being here, for bringing yourselves, and for your wonderful questions and your dedication to wanting to help. It makes me feel a lot less alone in all of this. So I hope you all feel the same too. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Emily. Yeah, I'll close the room in just a second. Yeah, thank you for giving that workshop. It was very moving. All of Emily's details are on our Facebook page, as well on the Facebook Live video of this, so you'll see everything on there if you didn't get a chance to write it down from the chat. Yeah, so I have a free-flying budgie who's singing away. Yeah, thank you so much, and bye-bye, everyone.